My friend built a system that kept a TV station alive, and the greedy boss who tried to cheat him, he ended up paying $2,000 a month just to stay on air. But that was just the start. Stick around to see how this backfired big time.
My name's Brandon Keller, and this story takes place right after I graduated college. I was one of those wide-eyed early 20s guys who thought that landing a full-time job meant I'd made it, that I was finally stepping into the adult world with a real shot at a career. Back then, I didn't know that sometimes your first job isn't a stepping stone. It's a warning label. And that warning? It came wrapped in a cheap suit named Frank Delaney. Frank was the owner of a small, independent TV station in Northern California. We're talking Channel 6 Central View, one of those stations that ran low-budget local news, late-night talk shows that looked like they were filmed in someone's garage, and commercials for car dealerships that screamed at you through the screen. Think old-school public access vibes with just enough money to pretend it was real TV. Now, Frank had money. Don't let the budget setup fool you. He drove a Mercedes, wore a Rolex, and always bragged about his investment properties. But the man was cheap in ways that would impress Ebenezer Scrooge. He was the kind of boss who'd order catering for a meeting and then make the interns pay for it. He'd rather lie, cheat, and squirm than pay $1 more than he thought he should. So when he landed a big contract with DirecTV, we were all surprised and a little nervous. This wasn't just a local upgrade, this was going regional. For the first time in the station's history, we were going to broadcast across the entire Bay Area. Real exposure, real ad revenue, and real pressure. There was a catch, though. We had 2 months to upgrade our systems to meet DirecTV's broadcast requirements. If we missed the deadline, Frank would be penalized daily. Thousands of dollars, bleeding out of his pockets every 24 hours. You'd think that kind of pressure would motivate him to make smart choices. Nope. Frank didn't have a clue how the technical side of broadcasting worked, so instead of hiring someone with experience, he took my suggestion and brought in my buddy Jake Marino. Jake and I went to college together. Brilliant guy. He was a computer science major with a knack for hardware and media systems. Not a traditional broadcast engineer, but if you gave him a problem and a budget, he'd find a way to make it work. Jake took one look at the station's outdated system and said, "You want to make this work, you'll need about $15,000 to build something automated, stable, and future-proof. Otherwise, you're going to be duct taping this thing together every day." Frank's eyes bulged like someone had just kicked him in the wallet. 15 grand? That's robbery, he barked. I built whole offices for less than that. Jake shrugged. Then feel free to call someone else. But Frank wasn't done. He did what sleazy businessmen always do when they think they're being clever. He tried to negotiate dirty. He told Jake, find a way to do it for half, and I'll reimburse you for any hardware costs later. Later. That magic word greedy people use when they have no intention of actually paying you. I pulled Jake aside afterward and said, "Dude, don't do it. Don't spend a dime of your own money for this guy. He's gonna screw you." But Jake just smiled and said, "Nah. I've got a plan. Trust me." So Jake worked some serious magic. He scavenged parts from surplus auctions, rewired old gear, and even coded a mini tool to handle the uplink. It wasn't the automated system he pitched, but it worked. It wasn't elegant, but it met the contract requirements, and it got us on DirecTV on time. The day we went live, Frank strutted through the office like he'd just invented cable. "We did it, folks," he said to everyone. "Big win for the Channel 6 team." Like it was some team effort, when really it was Jake in the server room every night sweating bullets over soldering irons and Ethernet cables.
But then came the bill. Jake walked into Frank's office with a simple invoice, $7,200, parts, time, setup. Nothing crazy, way less than what he'd originally quoted. And that's when Frank did exactly what we all knew he would. Yeah, he mumbled. "I'm just a little tight this month. Can we do this next quarter? You know how these things go." Jake didn't flinch. "No worries," he said, calm as anything. "But just so you know, all the hardware, I paid for that out of pocket. It's mine. If I'm not paid, I'll be removing it by Friday." And also, you might want to look into how your uplink system actually works. Frank blinked. What the hell does that mean? Jake smiled. It means there's no automation. Every day, someone has to manually configure the uplink. It takes 5 minutes, but if no one does it, the station doesn't go on the air. Guess who's the only person who knows how to do it? Silence. Jake continued. Pay me the full $7,200 plus $2,000 a month for consulting, or your station goes dark, and those DirecTV penalties start hitting your bank account. Frank paid. Fast. He was pissed, but what could he do? He tried to screw over the only guy holding his operation together, and now he had to pay the price. Every month. Jake would show up, tap a few keys, check the signal, sip a cup of coffee, and walk out $2,000 richer for 10 minutes of work every single day. And I watched the whole thing unfold like the world's most satisfying sitcom. Jake ran the show, and Frank hated every second of it. For months, he tried to pretend everything was fine. He'd plaster on a fake smile whenever Jake walked in, crack a dry joke about how tech guys always find a way to get paid, and act like he wasn't absolutely seething inside. But you could see it in his eyes. Frank was looking for a way out, and fast. He couldn't stand that he had to rely on someone he tried to screw over. Worse, everyone at the station knew about it. The editors, the on-air talent, the interns, all of them knew that if Jake stopped showing up, Channel 6 would go dark, and every single DirecTV subscriber in the Bay Area would get a blank screen instead of the morning broadcast. To make matters worse for Frank, Jake wasn't shy about the situation. He didn't rub it in, but he wasn't exactly subtle either. Once I saw him sitting in the break room with a cup of coffee, looking at his phone when Frank walked by. "You done with the uplink?" Frank asked, already annoyed. Jake just looked at his watch. "Gotta wait another minute for the signal test to finish," he said casually. "Don't want DirecTV thinking we're amateurs." Frank grumbled something under his breath and stormed off, but everyone around just smirked. He tried to fight back in little ways. First, he had one of the production assistants, this kid named Eli, shadow Jake during the uplink process. Frank's idea was obvious. Train Eli, replace Jake, cut the $2,000 a month. Classic Frank.
But Jake was 10 steps ahead. He didn't block Eli from watching, but he didn't make it easy either. The system was complicated on purpose. Jake had built it with a lot of obscure command line shortcuts, aliases, and sequence triggers that made no sense unless you knew exactly what you were looking at. It wasn't plug and play. It was Jake and stay. After 2 weeks of trying to learn the ropes, Eli gave up. He told me, "Man, it's like trying to learn Klingon mixed with Morse code. If I screw one thing up, the signal doesn't go out. I'm not risking that." Frank wasn't happy. Then came phase 2 of his genius plan. He brought in a third-party IT guy, some freelance contractor named Ray, who used to work with Frank on a different business. Ray looked confident walking in the first day. Bald guy, Bluetooth earpiece, that weird confidence that comes from being overpaid and underqualified. He spent a few hours poking around Jake's system and declared, "I can probably simplify this with a new GUI and some middleware. Shouldn't take more than a week." That week lasted 3 days. By the end of day 3, Ray admitted that he couldn't figure out half of the command scripts Jake had written. Apparently, Jake had even embedded his own shorthand into the terminal prompts, making the interface look normal on the surface, but with variables and execution paths that only he could decode. Ray packed up and left. We never saw him again. Frank's options were running out. Meanwhile, Jake kept showing up, doing his 5-minute job, collecting his check, and living rent-free in Frank's head. I'll say this, Jake never once gloated. He never lorded his advantage over anyone, but he made one thing very clear. He was playing the long game. I asked him once, "How long are you going to keep this up?" He grinned and said, "Until I get bored." And eventually, that's what happened. Almost a year in, Jake pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Bran, I think I'm done." "You quitting?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "Not because of Frank, because it's not a challenge anymore. I proved my point, I got paid, I've got other contracts now that actually excite me. But before I go, I'm going to leave a little gift. He spent the next 2 weeks training Eli, the same guy who gave up the first time, but now with the benefit of a year's worth of documentation. Jake cleaned up the system, simplified the code, and wrote a user manual that even Frank couldn't screw up. When he was confident Eli could handle it, Jake submitted his formal resignation and walked away. No drama, no bitterness, just a firm handshake and a smirk. I remember the last thing he said to Frank as he left. You could have had a fully automated system for $15,000. Instead, you paid more than double that, wasted a year, and burned every bridge along the way. Think about that next time you try to lowball someone who actually knows what they're doing. Frank didn't say a word. He just nodded, probably choking on his own pride. Jake left the building, and for the first time since we started the DirecTV deal, Frank was alone with his own bad decisions. You'd think that would be the end of it.
You'd think Frank might have learned something. Like, maybe don't try to screw over the one guy who holds the keys to your operation. Or maybe, just maybe, pay people fairly and treat them with a shred of respect. Nope. A few months later, the same pattern started again. Frank hired new freelancers to rebuild other parts of the station's infrastructure. And guess what? He delayed payments, tried to renegotiate rates after work was done, claimed budgets were tight after bragging about a new watch or a trip to Vegas. It was like watching a rerun of a show that never gets better. Only this time, people were ready. Word about Frank's tactics had started spreading through the local media and freelance circles. Contractors ghosted him. Engineers turned him down. Even vendors demanded deposits before shipping parts. Frank had built a reputation. Not the kind you put on a resume, but the kind that gets whispered in warning. And me? Well, I was planning my exit too. By the time Jake had left and the dust from that year-long standoff settled, I'd been working at Channel 6 for just over a year myself, and I had seen enough. Frank wasn't just a bad boss. He was a toxic liability. The kind of guy who could take a good opportunity, squeeze every ounce of life from it, and leave behind a hollow, broken mess. And I wasn't going to let him do the same thing to my career. The sad thing was, I actually liked the work. I liked the creative side of broadcasting, editing promos, planning new segments, building connections with the crew. We had some genuinely talented people on the team, people who cared, people who wanted to build something. But working under Frank was like trying to grow a garden in a landfill. No matter how hard you worked, the rot at the top always seeped down. So I started looking for a way out, but quietly. I kept doing my job. I smiled when Frank walked by. I stayed professional. But behind the scenes, I was reaching out to contacts, updating my resume, and building a reel of all my best work. I even reached back out to Jake, who by that point was doing tech consulting for 3 regional media groups. I asked him if he had any leads, and sure enough, he connected me with a media company downstate that was expanding into digital production. They brought me in for an interview, and it couldn't have been more different from Channel 6. Clean office, real HR department, leaders who asked intelligent questions and seemed like they actually gave a damn. A week later, they offered me a full-time position with better pay, benefits, and a clear path forward. I accepted immediately. But before I turned in my notice, I decided to set the stage, not for revenge in the traditional sense, but something a little more subtle. A parting shot, if you will. You see, by now, I had become the go-to guy at Channel 6. I wasn't a lead or a supervisor, but I knew how everything worked. Who did what, how the tech stack was wired, where the bodies were buried. When something broke, Frank called me first. When someone quit, he leaned on me to train the next hire. I was the unofficial glue holding the content team together. And that made me dangerous. Not in a malicious way. I wasn't looking to sabotage anything.
But I knew that if I walked out without preparing someone to take over, the entire content pipeline would freeze. And I also knew Frank wouldn't think to ask me to document anything until it was too late.
So I started building what I now call the Everything Binder, a full how-to guide on every workflow I was responsible for. Video processing, scheduling tools, even login credentials for legacy apps Frank didn't even know he still used. I printed it, indexed it, and placed it neatly in a locked drawer in my desk. Then I wrote a short letter and taped it to the cover. This is what you didn't pay me enough to do. If you're smart, you'll give it to someone who actually cares before the next disaster hits. Then I waited. On a Tuesday morning, I walked into Frank's office and handed him my formal 2 weeks' notice. He stared at it like it was written in Chinese. "You're quitting?" he said flatly. "Yep," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "We were just talking about giving you more responsibilities. You sure about this?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Frank, I've been sure about this for 6 months. This place is a revolving door for a reason, and you know it." He didn't argue. He just nodded and muttered something about good luck and don't expect a reference. I smiled and walked out. During those final 2 weeks, I did my job exactly by the book. No more, no less. I trained the new hire just enough to survive. I answered questions when asked, but I didn't volunteer anything. I kept the Everything Binder to myself until my final hour on the clock. At 4:59 p.m. on my last day, I walked it over to the new guy, set it on his desk and said, "You're going to need this. Don't let him screw you over like he's done to everyone else." Then I walked out of Channel 6 for the last time, and I swear to God the sun felt different outside that door. Over the next few weeks, I heard things through the grapevine. Frank tried to shift some of my responsibilities to 3 different people, none of whom had the experience to handle the load. The new guy I trained quit within a month, said the environment was soul-crushing. The station started missing deadlines and advertisers began pulling out. Then, a month or 2 later, I got a text from one of my old coworkers, a screenshot of a Craigslist ad Frank had posted. Channel 6 seeks experienced producer, editor, technical director, must-know broadcast workflows, IT infrastructure, and promotional scheduling. Must be available nights and weekends. Pay negotiable. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. He was basically asking for me, Jake, and the station engineer rolled into one person and offering negotiable pay. In other words, nothing up front and an IOU later. It was so frank it hurt. A few months after I left Channel 6, I had pretty much closed that chapter of my life. My new job was solid, stable pay, great people, actual respect from management. It felt like I had escaped a toxic relationship and finally learned what it meant to be appreciated for my work. I wasn't looking back, not really. But then one afternoon, I was grabbing coffee with Jake. We were catching up, trading stories, laughing about Frank's Craigslist ad, when he leaned in and said, "You want to know what finally did him in?"
I raised an eyebrow. "What, Frank? You telling me Channel 6 finally shut down?" Jake smirked. "Not yet, but it's coming. I got a call last week from one of the vendors we both used, guy who handled satellite data compliance checks. Apparently, Frank's been failing the signal quality tests for weeks. Small stuff at first, then whole segments started dropping out. Glitches, misfires. Last week, a 7-minute blackout during prime time." I whistled. "Ouch, that'll make DirecTV real happy." Jake nodded. "Exactly. Word is, DirecTV sent a written warning. One more strike and the station's getting dropped from their regional feed." I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, feeling that slow burn of satisfaction. You think he knows what caused it? Oh, he knows. And get this, the guy he hired to replace me, he left mid-contract. Said Frank tried to change payment terms after he'd already started building the upgrade. "Classic," I said. "That man will never change." And he didn't. Frank kept doing what Frank always did, chasing short-term savings, stiffing the people who bailed him out, and somehow acting surprised every time the roof caved in. The man never understood that systems aren't just hardware and code. They're people, relationships, trust. When you burn that down, no fancy title or fat wallet can save you. A few months later, I got an email from one of the old station producers. She had jumped ship and was now working for a local streaming news service. Her message was short but sweet. Channel 6 just got pulled from DirecTV. He's blaming technical issues. Thought you'd enjoy that. I laughed out loud. That was it. The end of the line. The contract that was supposed to take Channel 6 from a dinky local station to a regional powerhouse had ended in silence, a dead signal, the kind of silence Frank feared most. And it wasn't like we sabotaged him. Jake and I had both walked away clean, with warnings and documentation and everything he needed to keep the lights on. He failed because he refused to do the one thing that would have kept it all going. Respect the people who built it. You know, a lot of people think revenge is about rage, about getting loud, causing a scene, throwing a punch. But the best revenge I've ever seen, the most satisfying, the kind you want to hear again and again, is slow. It's calculated. It's patient. And most of all, it's earned. We didn't steal anything. We didn't break anything. We just gave Frank exactly what he asked for. He wanted it cheap. He wanted it fast. He wanted it his way. And he got all of it, with interest. By the time Channel 6 lost its DirecTV deal, its advertisers, and most of its staff, it was just a shell. A run-down building with aging equipment, unpaid bills, and a boss who still thought he could talk his way out of anything. But the industry had moved on. The good talent found better homes. The viewers, they didn't even notice when Channel 6 disappeared. As for me, I never went back. But I took everything I learned from that experience, every broken promise, every late paycheck, every lunch break where I watched someone get screwed, and I turned it into something new. I started collecting stories like mine and Jake's, tales of regular people standing up to greedy bosses, con artists, and workplace tyrants. Stories where the little guy finally gets the win.
I launched a small YouTube channel, just for fun at first. Voiceover-style videos telling these real-life revenge stories. Anonymized, of course. Clean names, no identifying details. But every story hit the same theme. You treat people like tools, and eventually they stop fixing your mess. My first upload? This story, the Channel 6 saga. I thought maybe a few hundred people would watch it. I was wrong. Within a week, it had tens of thousands of views. Comments flooded in from people who had worked for Franks of their own, bosses who stole credit, withheld pay, or used promises like currency. And they all said the same thing. This is the revenge I've always wanted to see. That's when I knew I was onto something. The world is full of Franks, but it's also full of Jakes. And maybe, just maybe, I could give those people a voice. So yeah, that was my first job out of college. And it was the worst and best thing that could have happened to me, because it taught me that revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's just doing your job, walking away, and letting their house of cards collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. Let that be a warning to every Frank out there. If you treat people like they don't matter, don't be surprised when they stop showing up to save you.
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.